What started as a simple music collaboration has now exploded into one of the most unexpected and chaotic feuds in the hip-hop world. And nobody saw this coming. Imagine this. Two rising forces in the rap game. One track that was supposed to unite fans, and instead, it allegedly became the trigger for betrayal, ego clashes, and a full-blown behind-the-scenes fallout that is now sending shockwaves across social media. Reports are claiming that NLE Choppa was originally tied to a major feature involving Coi Leray. But somewhere along the line, things took a sharp and sudden turn. Sources are now suggesting that Choppa was quietly removed and replaced by none other than NBA YoungBoy. And that's where everything allegedly spiraled out of control. Because what followed next wasn't just disappointment, it was anger. Real, raw, and unfiltered. So insiders are hinting that NLE Choppa didn't just move on from the situation. He felt blindsided, disrespected, and publicly undermined. And when emotions like that collide with pride in the music industry, things don't stay quiet for long. Whispers of heated reactions, cryptic posts, and indirect shots began surfacing almost immediately. Fans started connecting dots. Screenshots began circulating. And suddenly what looked like a simple replacement on a track began to feel like something much deeper. Something personal. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because now rumors are spreading that this wasn't just a label decision or a simple creative switch. Some are claiming there may have been conversations, disagreements, or even silent tensions behind the scenes that led to Choppa being pushed out at the last moment. And if that's true, then this situation is no longer just about a song. It's about loyalty, industry politics, and a possible rivalry that could ignite into something much bigger than anyone expected. So the real question is, was NLE Choppa actually disrespected and replaced without warning? Or is there a deeper story the public hasn't heard yet? Because according to insiders, this is only the beginning of the fallout. To understand how things allegedly reached this boiling point, you have to rewind. Because this tension didn't just appear overnight. It was quietly building in the shadows long before the public even had a clue. NLE Choppa has always been known for his high-energy persona, his outspoken nature, and his refusal to stay silent when he feels wronged. From the moment he stepped into the spotlight, he built a reputation not just as an artist, but as someone who doesn't tolerate disrespect, whether real or perceived. Every move he makes is watched closely, and every reaction he gives tends to spark headlines, debates, and controversy. On the other side of this situation is NBA YoungBoy, an artist whose influence in the rap game is undeniable. Despite a more reserved public presence, his impact behind the scenes is massive. His fan base is one of the most loyal and vocal in the industry, and his name alone carries weight in collaborations, streaming power, and cultural relevance. And then there's Coi Leray, an artist who has consistently navigated the pressures of the industry while balancing collaborations, creative direction, and public perception. Yet her position often places her right at the center of decision-making when it comes to features, track lists, and final releases. Now, here's where things start to get complicated. In the music industry, features are not just about talent. They're about timing, branding, label negotiations, audience reach, and strategic alignment. Tracks often go through multiple versions before the final release, and artists can be added or removed for reasons that are rarely made public. But according to whispers from inside circles, the situation involving this particular track was not as smooth as it appeared. Sources suggest that NLE Choppa may have originally been attached to the record during an early phase of production. At that stage, everything seemed aligned: energy, creative direction, and even promotional expectations. Fans may have even begun anticipating a collaboration without realizing how fragile the arrangement actually was. Then, somewhere along the line, things allegedly shifted. No official announcement, no clear explanation. Just a quiet replacement that, on the surface, looked like a standard industry decision. But behind closed doors may have carried tension, disagreement, or even conflict. Industry insiders claim that Choppa wasn't informed in a way that he expected, or at least not in a way that he felt respected. And in a business where communication and credit matter deeply, that kind of situation can quickly turn personal. Meanwhile, NBA YoungBoy stepping into the track added another layer of complexity. Not because of him directly, but because of what his involvement symbolized. To some, it looked like an upgrade or a strategic pivot. To others, it may have felt like a direct replacement that carried implications far beyond music. And that's where perception becomes reality in the public eye. Because once fans started noticing the change, speculation took over. Comments began circulating across platforms. People started asking questions. Was Choppa dropped? Was there a disagreement? Did something happen behind the scenes that forced a last-minute switch? At first, none of this was confirmed, but the silence itself only fueled more curiosity. In situations like this, silence can often speak louder than statements. And in the absence of an official explanation, narratives begin to form. Some accurate, some exaggerated, and some completely speculative. For NLE Choppa, who has built his identity on authenticity and standing his ground, a situation like this, if true, would naturally strike a nerve. Not just professionally, but personally. Being replaced on a track isn't uncommon in the industry, but how it's handled can make all the difference between a quiet transition and a public fallout. And for NBA YoungBoy, stepping into a track under these circumstances places him in the middle of a situation that may not have even involved him directly at the start, but now connects him to a growing wave of attention, interpretation, and comparison. Meanwhile, Coi Leray remains at the center of the storm, as the artist tied to the track itself. Every decision linked to the record now becomes part of the larger narrative, whether intended or not. What makes this even more intense is the history of unpredictability in hip-hop collaborations. Over the years, countless tracks have undergone last-minute changes, surprise features, and unexpected removals. But when those changes involve high-profile names with strong fan bases, the reaction is never just about music. It becomes about loyalty, respect, and status. And according to early chatter from insiders, this wasn't just a simple switch. It may have been the moment that quietly set off a chain reaction nobody fully anticipated. Because behind the scenes, emotions were allegedly already rising, tensions were already forming, and once the replacement happened, something reportedly shifted in NLE Choppa's response that made the situation far more volatile than anyone expected. And what started as a studio decision may have just become the beginning of a much bigger conflict. The moment that allegedly changed everything didn't happen on stage. And it didn't happen in an interview. It happened quietly behind closed doors. And yet, the ripple effects are now echoing across the entire industry. According to multiple unverified insider reports circulating online, the final decision to replace NLE Choppa on the track came at a stage when the song was already close to completion. That detail alone made the situation feel less like a creative adjustment and more like a last-minute removal that caught Choppa off guard. Sources claim that Choppa first became aware of the change through indirect channels rather than an official conversation, and that's where the frustration allegedly began to build. In an industry where communication is everything, discovering a replacement through secondary sources, if true, can feel like a direct hit to both pride and professional respect. Shortly after, a subtle but noticeable activity began appearing online. Cryptic posts, vague captions, short-lived stories that seemed to hint at disappointment without naming anyone directly. Fans quickly started dissecting every word, every emoji, every timing detail, trying to connect them back to the sudden shift in the track's lineup. One alleged post that circulated widely, though never officially verified, suggested feelings of being overlooked and moved aside without warning. Another hinted at loyalty not being valued, which fans immediately interpreted as a reference to the replacement situation. At the same time, NBA YoungBoy's involvement began gaining traction as snippets of the track or mentions of the feature started spreading across fan pages. His name attached to the project brought a surge of attention, but also unintentionally intensified comparisons. Because now the conversation wasn't just about a song anymore. It became about who deserved to be on it. Inside fan communities, debates erupted almost instantly. Some argued that the switch made sense from a commercial standpoint, pointing to YoungBoy's massive streaming numbers and consistent chart presence. Others pushed back, insisting that Choppa's original involvement should have been respected and preserved. And that's where the tension escalated beyond music, because perception began to split into two camps: those who saw the replacement as a strategic upgrade, and those who viewed it as a form of disrespect. Meanwhile, insiders claim that Choppa's reaction behind the scenes was far more intense than what was visible publicly. Allegedly, he expressed frustration not just about being removed, but about the manner in which it was handled, or reportedly mishandled. In situations like this, it's not always the decision itself that causes the biggest reaction. It's the feeling of being sidelined without acknowledgement. And that emotional layer is what reportedly transformed this from a simple feature change into something far more personal. Then came the first major twist. Whispers began to spread that this replacement may not have been purely a label-driven decision. Instead, some sources suggested that there could have been disagreements related to creative direction, branding alignment, or even interpersonal dynamics between parties involved in the project. And if true, that means the situation wasn't just about swapping one artist for another. It may have involved underlying tensions that were never made public. Suddenly, the narrative began to shift. What looked like a straightforward replacement started to resemble a deeper breakdown in collaboration, one that possibly involved communication gaps, conflicting expectations, or last-minute strategic pivots that left one party feeling blindsided. And just as this interpretation began gaining traction, another layer emerged that made the situation even more complicated. Because instead of cooling down, the online reactions began amplifying the tension. Fan pages started tagging both artists. Comment sections turned into debate zones. Clips, edits, and speculative breakdowns began circulating, each one adding fuel to an already growing fire. And at this point, silence from the involved parties only intensified curiosity. No clear explanation, no joint statement, no direct clarification. And in the absence of answers, assumptions started becoming facts in the eyes of many viewers. That's when the situation took a darker turn. Because now attention shifted from the track itself to the perceived relationship between the artists involved. Fans began asking whether this was just a business move or the beginning of an actual rift. And according to ongoing speculation, the next development would not just escalate the story, it would completely change how people interpreted the entire situation. Just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any more intense. The narrative took another unexpected turn that sent shockwaves across social media. And new waves of speculation began surfacing, suggesting that the replacement wasn't as simple, or as one-sided, as many initially believed. According to additional unverified insider chatter, there may have been multiple versions of the track circulating internally, with different feature combinations being tested before the final release decision was made. This detail completely shifted how people were interpreting the situation. Because instead of a sudden replacement, some sources hinted at a process where artists were being evaluated based on the evolving direction of the song. In that version of events, NLE Choppa's removal may have been tied to a creative pivot rather than a direct conflict, though that explanation didn't necessarily ease the tension it created. At the same time, Pamihen. B. YoungBoy's involvement began to look less like a spontaneous substitution, and more like a calculated move to align the track with a different audience demographic and sonic direction. His fan base, known for its massive engagement and streaming power, added a layer of commercial appeal that some insiders claim influenced final decisions. But here's where things escalated dramatically. A set of alleged leaked comments began circulating across platforms, claiming that Choppa felt blindsided not just by the replacement, but by the lack of direct communication leading up to it. These posts, while never officially confirmed, fueled the perception that there may have been a breakdown in trust or coordination during the final stages of the project. Fans immediately picked up on the implications. Threads began forming on X, Twitter, with users breaking down timelines, comparing snippets, and analyzing past interactions between the artists involved. Some users claimed the situation pointed to deeper industry politics, suggesting that decisions like these are often influenced by label priorities, market strategy, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that the public never sees. One viral thread claimed, "Nothing about this was random. Features get swapped when leverage shifts." While unverified, statements like these rapidly gained traction, further intensifying the debate. Meanwhile, fan reactions began turning increasingly polarized. Supporters of NLE Choppa argued that removing him without clear acknowledgement felt like a lack of respect, emphasizing that artists should be credited and communicated with transparently. They pointed to his consistency, work ethic, and fan loyalty as reasons he deserved to remain on the track. On the other side, NBA YoungBoy's supporters pushed back hard, arguing that his involvement elevated the track's reach and relevance. They highlighted his track record of dominating streaming platforms and claimed that his addition made the final version stronger commercially and artistically. This divide quickly transformed the situation into more than just a disagreement. It became a public comparison between two major artists, each with passionate fan bases defending their position. But the most shocking development came when attention shifted back to Choppa's perceived response. Subtle online activity, likes, reposts, and brief interactions were interpreted by fans as indirect signals of dissatisfaction. Even though no direct statement was issued, the timing and tone of his digital presence led many to believe he was intentionally addressing the situation without naming names. And that's when the controversy reached a new level, because now the conversation was no longer about a single track. It was about respect, recognition, and the unspoken rules of collaboration in the music industry. Industry observers began weighing in as well, suggesting that scenarios like this, while common, rarely become public unless something about the situation feels unresolved or emotionally charged. And in this case, the lack of clarity only made the speculation stronger. As theories continued to spread, one major question started dominating discussions. Was this simply a creative decision that spiraled out of control in public perception? Or was there something deeper happening behind the scenes that forced this situation into the spotlight? Because according to the latest whispers, what hasn't been revealed yet might completely redefine how this entire incident is understood. The moment this situation reached the public, it didn't just trend. It exploded. Across every major platform, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, users began dissecting the drama frame by frame, post by post, comment by comment. What started as a quiet industry switch had now turned into a full-scale online debate that seemed to grow more intense with every passing hour. Fans were no longer just observing, they were choosing sides. Supporters of NLE Choppa flooded comment sections with messages of outrage, claiming that removing him without a proper explanation felt disrespectful and dismissive. Some users argued that this kind of treatment reflects deeper issues within the industry, where artists can be swapped out without public acknowledgement, leaving them to deal with the fallout alone. Others took a more analytical approach, posting long threads attempting to reconstruct the timeline of events. They pointed to subtle online activity, deleted interactions, and shifts in promotional material as evidence that something changed behind the scenes at the last minute. Meanwhile, NBA YoungBoy's fan base responded with equal intensity. They emphasized his consistent impact, massive streaming numbers, and undeniable influence in the rap game. Many argued that his involvement brought a stronger commercial edge to the track, suggesting that the final version benefited from his presence both creatively and strategically. What made this even more heated was the direct comparison being drawn between the two artists. Fans began debating not just the situation, but the artists themselves. Who had more influence? Who deserved the feature more? Who was being underestimated? And who, if anyone, was truly wronged in the process? The comment sections turned into battlegrounds of opinions, with arguments escalating quickly and sometimes aggressively. At the same time, content creators and music commentators started jumping into the conversation. Breakdown videos began appearing, analyzing everything from industry practices to artist relationships. And some creators framed the situation as a normal part of the music business, where tracks evolve and features change frequently. Others leaned into the drama, suggesting that the lack of transparency made the situation feel more controversial than it might actually be. Even without official statements, the narrative was already fully shaped by public perception. And perception, in cases like this, often becomes more powerful than the facts themselves. Inside industry circles, however, reactions appeared more measured. Some insiders reportedly viewed the situation as a routine example of how creative direction can shift during the final stages of a project. Others acknowledged that while feature changes are common, the way they are handled behind closed doors plays a crucial role in avoiding misunderstandings. But what stood out most was the silence from the main parties involved. No detailed clarification, no joint explanation, no definitive breakdown of what actually happened. And in that silence, speculation continued to grow stronger, because when audiences are left without answers, they begin to create their own. Memes, reaction clips, and speculative edits began circulating rapidly, turning the situation into not just a controversy, but a viral moment that transcended music and entered pop culture conversation. At this point, the story had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just about a track, or a replacement, or even a possible disagreement. It had become a symbol of something bigger in the eyes of fans: control, respect, transparency, and the unpredictable nature of the music industry. And just when it seemed like the conversation might stabilize, a new wave of claims began surfacing that hinted at something even more unexpected, something that could potentially reframe the entire situation yet again. Because, according to emerging whispers, there may be one final piece of information that hasn't been addressed publicly, and if true, it could completely shift the narrative once more, leaving fans questioning everything they thought they understood so far. Just when the conversation seemed to settle into a predictable pattern of debates and opinions, a final wave of claims began circulating that shook the entire narrative to its core. According to additional unverified insider chatter, the situation involving the track may have included a contractual or scheduling complication that was never made public. Some sources suggest that multiple commitments, timing conflicts, or label-level decisions could have influenced the final lineup of the song more than any personal disagreement between the artists themselves. But here's the twist that changed everything again. A separate set of whispers began hinting that NLE Choppa may have actually been aware of ongoing changes to the track earlier than fans realized, but the communication may not have aligned with his expectations in terms of clarity, timing, or final confirmation. If true, this suggests that the issue may not have been a single moment of replacement, but rather a gradual breakdown in coordination that eventually led to misunderstandings. This completely reframes the situation, because instead of a sudden, unexpected removal, the reality may have involved overlapping decisions, unevolving creative direction, and communication gaps that created friction on both sides. At the same time, NBA YoungBoy's involvement remains part of the final product. But according to the latest speculation, his addition may have come from a separate stage of consideration rather than being directly tied to Choppa's removal. That means the two events, Choppa's exit and YoungBoy's entry, might not be as directly connected as fans originally assumed. And yet, the perception of replacement is what took over publicly. Because once fans saw one artist's name removed and another added, the assumption naturally became a direct swap, fueling the narrative that dominated social media discussions. Now, with these new claims entering the conversation, the entire situation becomes more complex than ever. Was this a case of miscommunication behind the scenes? A strategic creative shift that wasn't properly explained? Or a combination of industry logistics and timing that spiraled into a public controversy? What's clear is this: no single explanation has been officially confirmed, and no full statement has been released to settle the debate. And that uncertainty is exactly what continues to keep the story alive. Because in the absence of a definitive answer, speculation fills the gap, and every new detail only adds another layer to an already complicated narrative. For NLE Choppa, NBA YoungBoy, and Coi Leray, this situation may eventually be addressed directly, Or it may remain one of those industry moments that fans continue to analyze, debate, and reinterpret over time. But as of now, the truth remains partially hidden behind industry doors, with only fragments of information reaching the public. And according to insiders, there may still be details that haven't surfaced yet. Details that could further reshape how this entire situation is understood once they eventually come to light. Which leaves us with one lingering question. Is this truly the final version of the story? Or is there another twist still waiting to be revealed? And until that answer arrives, the controversy isn't just continuing, it's evolving, and now the real question is in your hands. What do you think actually happened behind the scenes in this situation? Do you believe NLE Choppa was genuinely disrespected and replaced without proper communication? Or do you think this was simply a normal industry decision that got blown out of proportion once fans caught wind of it? And where does NBA YoungBoy stand in all of this? Was his involvement purely a creative and strategic move? Or do you think his name being attached unintentionally escalated the controversy even further? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is one of those situations where every perspective matters, and the debate is far from over. If you're siding with NLE Choppa, explain why you feel he deserved better handling in this situation. If you're backing NBA YoungBoy, tell us why you think his addition made sense for the track. And if you believe the truth is somewhere in between, break down your theory in detail because the community is watching closely. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy deep dive breakdowns like this. Every like helps push more content like this to viewers who love unpacking the real stories behind the headlines. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because this situation is still developing. And if any new details, leaks, or confirmations emerge, you'll be the first to know. And here's something to think about before you go. In an industry where decisions are made behind closed doors and communication isn't always transparent, how many similar situations happen every day without the public ever knowing? Because this might just be one example, and the next update could reveal even more than what we've seen so far. Stay tuned, because this story is not over yet.